Please wrap up your conversations and make your way back to the concert hall for the second half of our program. Our next presenter will start in just a moment. Also wanted to let you know of a schedule change. The afternoon break will occur after Gwen Magita's session. Once again, the afternoon break will follow Gwen Magita's session. Now, back to our program. This outspoken, pioneering hero of sustainability is certainly not your run-of-the-mill former builder. When he served as executive officer of the Santa Fe Area Home Builders Association, he had the unique opportunity not just to show how to build high-performance, water-saving, durable homes, but he was also in a position to shape a national dialogue on water stewardship. A founding member of the development group that created the Water Efficiency Rating Score and a co-chair of the Next Generation Water Summit, please welcome Kim Shanahan.
Hello and welcome to Las Vegas. So how many of you are refugees from the polar vortex? Well, thanks for bringing it with us. Snow on the mountains in Las Vegas, pretty incredible. Love to see that water. My name is Kim Shanahan. I am a 32-year builder in Santa Fe, New Mexico. In 2008, after the collapse of our industry, I became the executive officer of the Santa Fe Area Home Builders Association, where we are considered the most radical chapter in America of the 700 or so in the Federation. As a matter of fact, Mr. Ron Jones was a member of my association so he could keep his status active with NAHB. And when I stepped down from that position at the end of November, I think Ron is also going to abandon any formal relationship with the National Association of Home Builders as well. Ron, of course, has been a mentor of mine for many years. I've met him because he was a New Mexico builder, and also met him because he was putting on, with a few other folks who are here in the audience, the very first National Green Building Conference up in Denver, Colorado, like in 1999, 20 years ago. And so we have been at this for quite some time in terms of sustainability. I will also say that so many of us back in the day, when we moved out to the Western United States, and I did in 1986, we were in an era of no growth. That was what us 30-somethings all believed was essential. Many of us read Edward Abbey and John Nichols and Desert Solitaire and things like that. And many of us believed that the very famous quote that Edward Abbey is attributed to, which is the growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of a cancer cell. Growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of a cancer cell. And so we had no growth, folks, of my generation. We evolved into smart growth. We evolved into sustainable growth. But we recognize that growth is not something that we can stop. As a matter of fact, here in the Southwest, the only known phenomena that will actually stop growth or slow growth is making everything more expensive. So we've seen communities like Aspen, and even to a certain extent in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where because they're expensive to live, growth has been relatively sustainable. In Santa Fe, about 1% a year, and about 1% a year for almost 100 years or so. But there is something that can stop growth. And the fact is that people want to move to the Southwest. As a matter of fact, those of you from the polar vortex very well may be dreaming about someday moving to a nice warm clime and enjoying your later years in a beautiful, sunny, dry place, which we are. If we don't have water, that will stop growth. As a matter of fact, in Santa Fe, New Mexico, some 20 years or so ago, we'll see a slide about this, we were facing building moratoriums. We had determined that we didn't have enough growth to sustain ourselves, or rather enough water to sustain ourselves for the growth that we had, which was only 1% a year. Water can stop growth, but it doesn't stop people from moving. As a matter of fact, there are 80-some million baby boomers. Economists from the National Association of Home Builders say that typically 12% of retirees move somewhere. So that's 10 million people. 10 million people who are part of my generation who very likely will say, let's pick up and get out of Minnesota or Michigan or Illinois and let's go down to the Southwest. So they're coming. They're absolutely coming. And so what do? How do we accommodate that growth? One of the things that I've talked about in the last couple of years is this notion of a sustainability failure point. What is your community's sustainability failure point here in the Southwest? And that point is a date in time. And that date is when growth comes this way and water resources come this way. And at some point in time, our governing bodies can legitimately say, there are no more permits. There are no more building permits because we simply cannot accommodate these folks coming in as we diminish our water resources. So I believe that the home builders need to lead the way on net zero water. Santa Fe, New Mexico gets about 12 inches of rain per year. We build, and have been building for the last couple of years, some net zero water homes that are completely off the grid, capturing roof water, which is the clean stuff, putting it in our tanks, putting it back in our houses through purple pipe. We treat it, we filter it, run it through UV lights, and we can drink it. So to the extent that we can actually start to promote these kinds of technologies means that we can push back our sustainability failure point further. And we can continue to build for those who are going to show up here in the Southwest. So Sarah Gutterman has a great article in our Green Builder, or in our program guide about 100, of the phenomena of a 100. And one of the significant 100s that we talk about and have been for some time about energy efficiency is this thing called a HER score, a 0 to 100 scale, where 0 is net zero energy. Well, we can have that same kind of phenomena with water. But it's not going to be market driven. Water's too cheap. You'll see in Santa Fe right there, we have some of the highest water rates in the United States. That has actually helped us reduce our gallons per capita per day significantly. We're probably the lowest in the West right now. Here in Las Vegas, they've done amazing things with water conservation, but they're still at about 200 gallons per capita per day. And we are in Santa Fe, we're down to 87 now. How did we get there? We'll talk about that as we go along. But the point being is that even at $154 a month, by the way, the gallons per capita today is not what we use particularly in our homes. It's everything that the public water supply supplies to us in Santa Fe. So it's our hotels, it's our restaurants, it's some of the golf courses. It's what we use in our homes and our lawns. But still down to 87 gallons per capita per day. Las Vegas is about 200. It's too cheap. It's too cheap to be market driven. When the HERS and ResNet came along, they knew that if you could, chop your energy bill in half, you could significantly reduce the cost of what it is to live in your home. And it would pay for itself. The things that you could do would pay for themselves, including solar panels and lots of other things. Water is not that way. Capturing, treating, and putting water back in your house is pretty expensive. And there certainly is no market drivers that will induce the consumers to do that. And so as General Clark said earlier this morning, we count on our governments to do things that help us, including building codes. And so that very well may be what we have faced with, is that here in the Southwest, that for the sake of our building industry, we very well may need to be embracing water conservation codes as opposed to fighting them or believing that these are all going to be market-driven solutions. The West will grow, and its people use the most water. This is a graph or a map that shows how much domestic water use, gallons a day per person. And you can see that the darker blues and the darker greens are in the Western United States. And you may not be able to see some of the figures that are on those individuals, but here in Nevada, by 2030, expecting 114% growth. 60% Texas, 109 in Arizona, 27% in California, 35% in Colorado. So we're growing, and we already use the most water per capita per day. As we look at some of these maps, I think it's important for us also to recognize this state right here, Colorado. And the reason is because Colorado is where all of our water comes from that goes this way on the Continental Divide and the Colorado River Basin, and it goes this way on the other side of the Continental Divide through New Mexico down into Texas. So everything here in the Southwest is depending on the water that comes into those mountains. Whether it's from stream flows or from the aquifer, it's all right there. We are in a mega drought. Jonathan Overpeck, a professor at the University of New Mexico, or excuse me, University of Michigan, has done a great deal of research, and he was a Nobel Prize recipient with the IPCC back when they handed that out to the IPCC. But he studied the Colorado River Basin pretty extensively. And we have had droughts in the past, and a mega drought is considered a drought that lasts for 20 years or more. The last big one we had in the late 50s and 60s was a drought that occurred because of a 20-year cycle of very, very little precipitation. Standard kinds of droughts, if you will. The drought that we are in right now, and we are entering the 20th year, is based on temperature. Temperature is what is causing the drought that we are faced with now in the Southwest. And what temperature does is it rises. It makes that snowpack that we may get actually very often evaporate, transpire before it actually even melts. It doesn't even come down to our streams or our aquifer, it just goes back up into the air. So we are facing a temperature drought, and it's still going on in 2019, and we honestly don't know where it's going to end. And it very well may not end. As we heard earlier today, it's getting worse in terms of climate change and heat. And so it's very likely that this drought that we are now in almost the 20th year has no foreseeable end. So who uses water? Everybody does, all kinds of industries and whatnot. This is a little probably hard to read, but I think you can see the colors. Purple, the purple bar, which is the one that's kind of down there, not the lowest, but the second lowest. The purple bar is public supply, what we deliver to our homes and our businesses and so on, what the water systems deliver to us. The purple one, not very much. You can see it's down here. And it's risen a little bit with population, kind of starting to go down as we start to see a little more conservative, but it's not the big one. And for many years, I thought irrigation and farmland, especially here in the Southwest, were the biggest consumers of the water. They are big. That's green. A lot of water being used in irrigation. The biggest one, though, is that gold one, and that is thermoelectric power. So the energy-water nexus is very, very real, very real. We certainly see that here in Las Vegas, where the lights never go off. It takes a great deal of water to create electricity. And conversely, it takes a great deal of water to deal with water here in the Southwest, primarily which is pumped out of the aquifers for the most part. So water and producing and delivering water to us is a huge electrical consumption, and electric itself is using a great deal of water to be produced. Who uses the most? Well, obviously the states with the largest populations do. California and Texas. That's the total withdrawals in 2015. Again, all of that water that they use in Southern California and Texas is coming out of that Colorado area, either one side of the Continental Divide or the other. We grow a lot of food out here in the Southwest, probably maybe inappropriately, and we do it through irrigation. And you can see that the eastern side of the Mississippi River is the light-colored ones where they get rain. And so they don't have to pull it out of the aquifer or divert it from streams to do the growing of food that we need. So it's a big consumer for sure. We also, because so many of us have moved here from those wet states, for many years we thought, well, you know, let's green up the desert. The desert shall bloom. And we put turf grass in, and we put deciduous trees in, and we try to replicate our former lives back in the green areas that we may have come from. So we use a lot of water just going into that domestic area. What's interesting about this is total withdrawals for domestic use. And you can see it's, you know, different states have different colors. But the reality is we all shower in the same length of time. We all go to the bathroom about the same amount of times per day. And so the indoor use of water is pretty consistent across the United States, whether you're from Minnesota or you're from Arizona. We pretty much use the same amount of water indoors no matter what. So it's an outdoor phenomena that is driving the West and the Southwest. We pull it from every stream. These are surface water withdrawals. Again, California and Texas, obviously, they've got a much larger population, so they're going to be the dark blue states. But again, you can see that this withdrawal of water is pretty well concentrated on the West. Groundwater withdrawals. They call it fossil water, mainly because we pull water out of our aquifers, and it's true that our streams do recharge our aquifers, but not anywhere near at the rate that we withdraw. And so that fossilized water has, just like peak oil, it's got a point where you can't drill a well deep enough. I know in New Mexico, the last few years, we've had many, many rural wells go dry, not deep enough. And if you are a senior on a fixed income and you cannot afford another $25,000 for a well, you're kind of screwed. You can't really just pull the casing out and drill a deeper hole. You got to start all over again. So Santa Fe. We, as I said, are down to about 87 gallons per capita per day. We also have been at this for a while. What this chart is showing you is how many acre feet of water we were at one time. And I must say that this chart is not looking how I remembered it. It's changed a little bit here in this PowerPoint. But on the left-hand side, at one point in time in 1995, when we had our pretty good crisis with water, we were using about 14,000 acre feet per year as a delivery, 14,000 acre feet. Compare that to Las Vegas, which is, I don't know, 300,000 acre feet that they get. But Santa Fe was 14,000. We realized that we had an issue, and so we were faced with two choices politically. One was to theoretically allocate 100 acre feet or more per year for new growth. That would have been 500 or 600 dwelling units per year, which is kind of what we were doing. Or we could do something much more radical, which is what we did. And we created what we call an offset principle. And that is that no new homes and no new businesses can come and get a permit unless they can show that they will have no net increased demand on the aggregate supply. So we have been at net zero water as a home building community in Santa Fe, even without doing anything inside the house. And the reason we did that is because that was the only way we were going to avoid the moratorium. The home builders at the time said, yeah, we'll take that 100 acre feet a year, build 500 homes, because we get 5 per acre foot, which is pretty good. But the reality was, there really wasn't any new water to give us. There really wasn't. We were at 14,000 acre feet. We actually had water rights for more, but that's all we were going to get as long as the governing body said we had it. And if they didn't, the idea would be that, all right, we're going to do the moratorium, no more building permits. Instead, we came up with something called a water bank. We'll talk about that in a minute too. But the point is that we went, and this graph is not showing it well, but we went from 14,000 acre feet to 9,000 acre feet in the space of a couple of years. So from 14 to 9. So we had 5,000 acre feet that we saved almost overnight at 5 homes per acre foot. We essentially bought ourselves 25,000 new homes before we ever got back up to 14,000 acre feet, which meant that we pushed back our sustainability failure point pretty considerably. Now, how do we do that? Well, the city of Santa Fe spent $1 million and they bought 10,000 Toto toilets, 1.6 gallon Toto toilets. This was right soon after the '96 mandate for 1.6, but many people obviously did not have them because toilets don't go bad that quickly. 10,000 toilets for $1 million, and we said, first come, first serve, they're free. Anybody wants one, just come and get it. And they did. And our water consumption dropped like a rock almost overnight. You see that in that dip right there on the left-hand side. Beyond that, we also said, to continue this notion of the offset, that we're going to have a toilet retrofit program. And we are going to empower plumbers to go into the community and change out a toilet in somebody's house for free. As a matter of fact, it got so desperate to find those toilets that plumbers would knock on people's doors or leaflet their front knob and say, give us a call and we'll give you a free toilet. Well, why did they do that? Because they could take that credit and deposit it in a water bank that the city of Santa Fe had established. And that water bank had those conserved credits, and each toilet that was retrofitted was worth $300 or $400. And builders actually had to buy those credits. I'll show a slide in a minute that kind of shows that. There was an interesting slide there. And it was a map of New Mexico, and it showed the various hues at a one point in time, and these drought monitors come out monthly, and I think it was a slide from 2018, and it showed a big dark blob over the 4 corners, Arizona, Colorado, and Nevada, or Utah rather. And it was just that one slice of time, but it was just the state. That dark blob that was over the 4 corners clearly extended into all of the other states surrounding it. And the point of that is that this mega drought is independent of what is happening today or even last year. So for instance, everybody today was like, wow, we got snow in the mountains here, we're gonna run off and fill up Lake Mead. Well, maybe a little bit, and maybe this year will be a wet year, but it doesn't mean that the drought in the Southwest is over, because the blob kind of moves around like an amoeba. So one year it might be Texas, one year it might be Arizona, Nevada, Colorado. The mega drought is permanent, it's here. There's the map, and there's the dark blob. That, if we extrapolated that out into the entire Rio Grande Valley or the Colorado River Valley, we would see that that blob really extends in a lot of different areas. So, as I said earlier, at one time we were kind of like here in Nevada, we were up to 170 acre feet per day, 170 gallons per capita per day. And we kept going down. We kept going down. This shaded area here was some emergency water restrictions that we had. You can see these drops. Here's the drops, another pretty, and then we kind of just bounced along slowly as we went along. And now we're down to 87 gallons per capita a day, and we believe we can go lower. Santa Fe's population has gone up, not much, 1% a year. Gallons per capita a day goes down, and total water use has gone down as well. The water bank. Some areas here in the Southwest have water banks. When the stormwater comes, they capture it and they inject it into the ground, a bank of water that we can take out later. That's not what Santa Fe's water bank is. It's like a bank with deposits and credits, and what it does is at the top it shows that a developer estimates the water budget. They submit it to the land use department. If it's less than 5 acre feet, they just buy it out of the water conservation bank. If it's more than 5 or 10 acre feet, 10 for residential, 5 for commercial, they have to go and buy wet water and transfer it to the city system. No developer wants to really do that unless they're doing quite a large scale. So we had about 5 acre-feet per, 5 houses per acre-foot. And so when we were at, you got to be under 10 to go just be able to write a check and get it out of the bank, we had a lot of 49-unit subdivisions because they could not have to go out and buy those wet water rights and go through the onerous process of transferring them. The developer pays a fee into that bank. If they need X amount of water, they pay a fee for their subdivision or their home. One of the things that we've been trying to get across is that if we can be 7 or 8 houses per acre foot, then that ease of going to the bank can be not 49 houses, but a bigger number, and developers like that notion. This has worked really well. This has worked really well for us in Santa Fe, and it has kept our home building industry viable in Santa Fe. And it really is one of these things that we believe needs to be replicated around the United States, or at least in the Southwest. Because the reality is, again, that no water is no growth, period. That's just it. And why is that? And that's because we all like to shut the door behind us. So when we move down here to the Southwest, we're like, I'm here, I got my water, and I don't really want to be more conservative so that developer can build a house for that person that just moved here. That's not my problem. We also know that we cannot fight thermoelectric to a certain extent. They need what they need. We also know that politically we can't really fight agriculture. And so the people, the industry that will be told to sacrifice will be the home building industry. And it'll basically be, can't sustain any more people in our market and the limited resources of water. And so home builders will lose that fight, as they always do. You may not think that that's true, because you may think of, well, these corporate builders, they can come in and they can lobby and they can get their way. Ultimately, as the political process goes along, the builders will be the ones who will be told, sorry, no more water. Unless we can actually push that sustainability failure point out ad infinitum. And that really is what we're trying to get across. Tomorrow I'm going back to the International Builders Show, where I will be talking to my brother builders and trying to get across to them that we in the home building industry have to lead the way on this. We have to lead the way on encouraging our governments to do the good things and pass codes upon us. And even though it will make our homes more expensive, it is something that if we do not do, we will die as an industry in the Southwest within a generation or two. A couple years ago, I was at a National Home Builders Association meeting, and a very progressive energy rater from Maryland, Montgomery County, Maryland, one of the most progressive communities in the United States, said, well, how much can a consumer really save if they cut their water consumption in half? And how much does it cost to do that? Well, the reality is it costs a lot. Capturing, putting it in a tank, treating it, pumping it, getting it back in the house is expensive. $10,000, $20,000 a house sometimes. But I asked the guy, I said, the question really isn't about how much is the consumer going to save. The question really is, how much is that next building permit worth to you as a business? How much is it worth to you as a builder to be able to continue to do what you want to do and serve that growth that is going to come to this area? And when we think about it that way, it really kind of flips it around, because it's not necessarily about what the consumer is going to drive. It really is about what we as an industry are going to do with our partners in government to be able to say, tax us, code us, mandate us, so that we can continue to survive. And I do think that it's a conversation that is beginning to resonate at the National Association of Home Builders. Ron Jones can tell you for hours about what obstinate people they can be, and they are. But we really have to get across this message here in the Southwest that as you polar vortex refugees, you climate refugees, come to a place that is usually warmer than it was today, we have to serve you. We have to be able to provide housing for you if you want to come here, because we can't stop you from coming. And so the message that I bring is that sustainability is not just about energy as it has been for all of us for the last 20 years or more. Double net zero is a doable thing. As a matter of fact, I was so enamored with the notion of double net zero that I bought it. I bought the website, Double Net Zero, $50. GoDaddy. I'm between jobs right now, so if anybody would like to make me an offer on Double Net Zero homes, we can work something out. But in the meantime, help us tell the building community that this is for their own good. And I thank you all today.
If you've been in the building industry for any length of time, it's likely you've come across the drum playing, solar installing, bike riding head of sustainability for Owens Corning. A 35-year veteran of the company, he has led Owens Corning to become one of the largest industrial purchasers of renewable energy with a mix of on-site solar and 250 megawatt PPAs of new wind capacity. Here to moderate our next session is Frank O'Brien Bernini.
Thank you very much. All right, so for this session, we're going to have a little fireside chat here. So I'm going to bring out the other two panelists right away. So Wes and Eliza, why don't you come on out? Clap for them too. All right, so the way this is going to work here, we've got 45 minutes to have a conversation. We're going to start. Wes is going to give a presentation that's going to kind of give some background and kind of like what's the lay of the land in terms of renewable energy. And then Eliza and I are going to have a conversation. Wes is going to join in about kind of the role of for-profit companies in this area of sustainability and in particular in the transition to decarbonizing our energy supply and the kind of steps forward in the industrial environment with the companies that we work for. But there's nothing special about the companies that are up here right now. So I'm from Owens Corning, Eliza's from Anderson. There's work going on across all of the companies in the world that are trying to make progress in this area. So we're going to do our best to represent the work that's going on in corporations around the world, but we'll do that in a way of drawing on some specifics so it kind of becomes real. And so we'll periodically mention our companies, and it's not in the form of advertising or bragging or anything like that. It's trying to make the conversation real with the work that's going on. So with that, I'm going to ask each of our panelists, Wes and then Eliza, to introduce themselves, and I'll do the same, and then we'll move to Wes's presentation, and then we'll have a little fireside chat. So why don't you start us off, Wes?
Okay. Hey, everybody. So I'm Wes Kennedy, and I'm the kind of dedicated solar hippie of this event. I first saw a solar panel at a renewable energy fair back in the early 90s, and I was just astounded that basically a shiny rock could turn sunlight into electricity. And so that began a 20-plus year odyssey of really working in the solar and energy storage space, running installation companies, working in manufacturing, and most recently in the microgrid space and this kind of emergence of the new grid. So I'm excited to be here today, and you'll get a fill of me for about 15 minutes here in just a minute.
All right. Eliza?
And we're both yogis. We have that connection.
That is true.
Hello, everyone. I'm Eliza Clark. I lead sustainability and community relations for Anderson Corporation. You probably know us as Anderson Windows. Frank asked us to share a little perspective on why we're here today on this stage, and I think for me, it's probably three key reasons. First, obviously, being my role. So at Anderson, I'm responsible for reducing our operational footprint, advancing product sustainability, reducing supply chain risk, and then also philanthropy. And we've had a really significant focus on sustainability in our philanthropic giving for about 5 years now. The second is I have been in the corporate sustainability world for about 12 years now, right when it was really emerging as a field, and have always been just a junkie for green building. So even back as a 20-something, spent a lot of time volunteering my time with the U.S. Green Building Council, and really craved real case studies. So that's what led me to Anderson. But most recently, helped to found a group called the Sustainable Growth Coalition in Minnesota. It's 35 of the largest companies in Minnesota, and we have aligned around the desire to advance a thriving circular economy. And our most significant focus thus far has been on clean energy. Uponor is another member who is here today. And the third, I think, has been our commitment to net zero buildings. So we really believe in the power of showing people what's possible. So we've provided free windows when necessary to net zero buildings in a range of applications. And you can actually see one of those if you're staying for the IBS show with Green Builder Media's Align project, which is a really cool, very high-tech net zero home.
Excellent, thank you. And as you heard, I'm Frank O'Brien Bernini with Owens Corning. You may be the token hippie, but I'm certainly the token former hippie. I
and I'm not a hippie at all.
Yeah. Well, I found out last night that when I was building solar houses passive solar houses in Vermont in the mid-'70s, Eliza told me last night she was -4. So, so I've been at this quite a while. After about 3 years building passive solar houses in southern Vermont, went back to school, got a master's in mechanical engineering, focused on solar design, then came to work for Owens Corning. So for 35 years, been working in energy efficiency. For the last 11 years, after my role leading R&D for the company, for the last 11 years, I've been focused full-time on sustainability and trying to move in various ways across the very holistic kind of view of sustainability, from environmental footprint reduction to sustainable products to wellness, safety, community action, kind of across the whole sustainability spectrum. But today we're mostly going to focus on the energy side of sustainability, which, as you all know, you've heard different pieces of this today, but while renewable energy is a very important tactic in this, it's one slice of the pie in the solution to the climate challenges, but that is the slice that we're going to focus on in this afternoon session. So with that, I'm going to turn it over, and we'll see what Wes has to sort of set the table for our fireside chat here.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so we've covered a pretty broad topic of themes today, and swirling around this whole idea of renewable energy has really been one of the common themes, the strongest themes. And so we may as well just continue with it. So really what I want to do is kind of just tell a story, and it's a story that most of us here in this room are going to be familiar with. But I think there's a few key elements that I hope are useful in not only understanding where we've come from and where we're going, but we're at a really interesting inflection point right now. And so this, where we are right now, is kind of where I want to share my experience with the group. So we've talked about this quite a bit. If it wasn't such not just a national emergency, but a global emergency, I was going to skip this slide. But climate change, it is upon us. The vast majority of scientific community and #thinking human adults believe that it's us, and we got to do something about it. Oops. Okay, so greenhouse gases. So where do they come from, and how do we use them? So basically, we've got your main sectors here: electricity production, transportation, and kind of what I will just call the built environment, right? So it's industry, industrial processes, buildings, both homes and commercial. Now, there's clearly a big slice there of agriculture, and that's a whole nother conversation that we won't delve into today. And where these sources primarily come from are, as we've talked about, the fossil fuels, right? So we got coal, we got oil, and we've got, and possibly the greatest coup of some PR department of all time, something called natural gas, which I think an alarming amount of people in the US think is somehow a green fuel, but it is still a fossil fuel. So how do we use this energy? Well, we use it primarily in these three, what are known as sectors of energy use, right? So transportation, our heating and cooling of our spaces, and then kind of this catch-all that I've called appliances and information, but it also includes, any of these industrial processes. So the first kind of interesting thing I want everybody to wrap their head around is this move towards integrating these three sectors from fossil fuels as the primary driver to electricity, right? So this is known as sector integration. And what you're starting to hear more bubble up in the kind of talking points in our field is the term decarbonization. And that's really what we're talking about. So it's moving all of these sectors of primary energy to electricity as the base deliverer of the service, and then shifting away from carbon as the core source, so to speak. And this is why this matters. So it's not just that we want to switch from vanilla to chocolate. It's not just that we don't like coal because it's aesthetically not pleasing. This is real gains to be made. This slide is showing a study that was done for a typical German household back in 2016. And they said, okay, let's examine what this typical home uses in terms of their energy for transportation, which would probably be a diesel Jetta. Their home was probably heated with a natural gas boiler system, and then their other electricity uses of appliances and whatnot. So the exercise took the same level of comfort, but just did this sector integration and this decarbonization study. So replacing diesel with an EV, moving to heat pump technology for heating, moving to state-of-the-art efficiency in appliances. And you could see their primary energy usage was cut in half. So this is a significant change without any change really in their level of comfort or convenience in their life, just by this sector integration. So then the key thing to think about then, it's like, okay, I get you, we want to move to electricity, but then we've got to move electricity to renewables. And kind of the rock stars of the renewable world is solar and wind. So this slide shows two of these kind of arm-in-arm tendencies whenever a new technology ramps. And that is, as costs drop, production or installation rates go up, and vice versa. So they feed each other. So what we're seeing here is from when I started in the industry in the late 90s, about 1 gigawatt of installed capacity of wind and solar, so just a teeny little fraction. And then in just a span of 18 years, we're up to over 1,000 gigawatts of installed capacity. So that's like 1,000-fold increase of installed capacity. It's exciting stuff. It's really astonishing. And the other lines here are showing the average price. And we see that solar and wind has been dropping precipitously until this really cool inflection point, which is where we are now, where, at that kind of bulk capacity, utility scale for both wind and solar, it is the cheapest form of electricity production that we have. So this is an exciting time. So it seems like we've got this thing pretty much licked, right? All we need to do is change everything from fossil fuels to electricity and then produce our electricity with renewables. Ta-da! But there's problems. There's always problems. So it's not just as easy as installing as much solar and wind as we can, and here's some reasons why. First of all, they're intermittent resources, right? So the wind doesn't always blow, sun doesn't always shine, so we got to figure out what to do about that. The other thing we see is, especially in the solar area, this so-called, this mismatch of supply and need. So the big yellow bump there, that's a typical solar production curve. They produce the most power in the middle of the day. But the orangish, reddish, purplish thing, that's a typical residential demand curve. So we use power in the morning before solar really starts producing a lot. And we use it in the evening after solar has done being, doing its thing. So this is also another issue that we have to figure out how to deal with. And let's not forget this backbone of our aging grid infrastructure. So we have an old grid that Thomas Edison would recognize, the vast majority of it. We've got centralized power production pushing electricity in one-way directions towards all of the homes and businesses and factories. So to couple with this is the grid itself is not really the stable edifice that we can just do whatever we want to and have it survive. So it's a kind of a spongy element. So every time a load, a demand hits the grid, the voltage and frequency will dip. And every time a new source pushes into the grid, the voltage and frequency will rise. So it's kind of like the surface of the balloon there. And our utility companies, they do a wondrous job of providing a very firm resource. The grid works most of the time. So we have to figure out how to deal with intermittency, mismatch of load and demand, and this kind of spongy effect of the grid. And that brings us to energy storage. So this is kind of where we're at right now. There's precipitous cost declines in solar and wind have happened. Storage solves much of the problems that come from integrating renewables into the grid. And this is kind of this inflection point. Now, of many different kinds of storage technologies, electrical batteries are at this point in time are the kind of the clear winning technology. And a couple of key reasons. First thing is they're very modular. We all have a battery that we carry in our pocket every day. So they can go from the size of a cell phone battery to the size of multiple shipping containers parked in a field somewhere. They're also extremely fast at their job. So this graphic is comparing it to like a traditional natural gas peaker power plant, which when the grid needs power, it takes minutes to provide. But a battery will do that in seconds, or in some cases less than a second. And they also, the cool thing about batteries is they're double duty. So they're both a load when needed, meaning they can absorb power from the grid, and they're a source, so they can give that power back to the grid. So for every battery investment, you're actually getting double capacity as a resource. And then the final point up there is also key, which they're scalable production. So we can't really just go make more Niagara Falls, which is another form of energy storage, but we can make batteries. So this is fueling this whole revolution. So once you get a battery coupled to a solar system, that demand curve looks a little different. What you do is you take all that energy that's being produced during the middle of the day and store your battery with it, or charge your battery with it. And then when you come home, you've got your own energy storage to pull off of. So it turns something that's kind of a stressor on the grid into a resource for the grid. Other solar plus storage benefits is resiliency or backup power. So not all systems do this, but they have the capability to island your house, to run your house when the grid is gone. The other thing that's exciting about storage is it can be used to work with your utility bill to save you money. And that's primarily in two different ways: peak shaving and load shifting. And they're both the same idea, which is just discharging your battery to offset loads. Peak shaving is just when you have a momentary but very expensive peak demand that the utilities charge dearly for. Many commercial rate structures, that's the highest part of their bill, is just this paying for these little peak demands. And then load shifting is the same idea, but over the course of more time. So this gives birth to this new grid that is bi-directional. Now you have sources, distributed energy resources, batteries out on the grid, and everybody's buying and selling into each other. So this new grid is a bi-directional grid. And it becomes the birth of the prosumer. So we're no longer just consumers of power, but we're both a producer and a consumer. Where this all leads to is the advent of the so-called smart home. Now this is where what's happening in the energy sector is dovetailing with what's happening in the automation and the Alexas of the world, where there are devices that control not just your smart appliances within your home, but manage the charging and discharging of the battery. So this is an exciting time. So now when you visualize this final, smart home, interconnected appliances, you're managing between your renewable energy source and your energy storage, including your electric vehicle. And now we've got these little smart homes all over the place. The next thing that we can do is interconnect them with another layer of communication. So this is known as aggregation of these resources, or the virtual power plant. So I know I kind of sped through a lot of this stuff, but I wanted to get us to this point conceptually. So to kind of recap briefly, we shifted all of our energy uses to electricity for the efficiency gains. We replace that electricity with renewable energy. We buffer and stabilize the renewable energy with storage. We interconnect all of our loads and objects and energy storage devices with electronics in our homes, and then we aggregate all of those resources into virtual power plants. So this is where this kind of emerging drive towards 100% renewable. So this is today. Last thing is we're talking about what would it actually look like. So remember that chart I showed you early on where it had from basically the year 2000 to the current time of 1,000-fold increase in solar and wind production. So that whole chart would fit just right here of this chart. So that 1,000-fold increase that feels so radical and so crazy is really the flat part of the curve. And this is what it can look like. And this is a study that was done through UC Berkeley, taking existing technology. It wasn't trying to imagine some Star Trek era technology on how we could scale to a 100% renewable grid. And the top that represents the big lopping off of the top of the curve there is all the efficiency gains from the sector integration and the decarbonization, including one really interesting one. The dark gray is the amount of energy that we save by no longer processing and mining and transporting fossil fuel energy itself. So I find that really fascinating. That's such a big savings. Okay, last slide. We're at a crossroads. We either have the world of chainsaws and monster trucks, the Mad Max world that we've all seen in too many movies. Or we've got this place that we can drive to of a sustainable, diverse, green, beautiful place. And as since it is President's Day, Barack Obama said, the future is ours to win, but to get there, we can't just stand still. Thank you for giving me some time.
Thank you very much, Wes. Okay, since about 41% or so of the greenhouse gas emissions that happen in the United States come from the operation of buildings, and some 7, 8, 9% comes from the actual products that we make, the embodied carbon associated with making the products that go into building those buildings. And then 37% or so is transportation, and the balance is industrial. So from a couple of companies here that are that balance, we want to talk a little bit about the things that we're doing, the things that our peers are doing to make a difference in this space. But first, what we wanted to do is get y'all moving a little bit, but then also with a purpose to see, could you stand up if you're a builder, designer, somebody that actually does building projects? So stand up.
Woo!
All right.
All right.
We're gonna build on this. Okay, how about product manufacturers? Go ahead and stand up. All right, how about, we're getting a good group. How about educators or media, academics, kind of that zone? All right, so we've got a few more. How about policymakers or political folks that play in government affairs? And then, because we need to get everybody in on this, how about just have an interest in this topic?
What do you do?
And if you're sitting down still, or not waving your arms if you have to sit down, then so this conversation we want to have with you, for you, in front of you for sure. But hopefully through this, you'll see in the roles that you have how this can matter through the decisions that you make every day. So with that, I'm going to start by asking Eliza, why is Anderson involved in this? Like, what is it about this space, and in particular, maybe sustainability in general, but in particular, the energy space? What has the company interested in this?
Well, I think for us, it did start with the scientific data that buildings were 40% of our worldwide carbon footprint. For more than 100 years, we've been producing energy efficiency solutions for our customers. So we've been very committed to the Energy Star program since its inception, and have continued to drive towards more and more energy efficient products. The focus on our footprint started more recently, probably about 10 years ago. And it started with more of a cost reduction driver, so reducing operating costs through energy efficiency improvements, which we've done a lot of amazing things across many of our plants. But back in 2015, we had a really amazing meeting with all of our executive committee members where we brought a young, I think she was 23-year-old architect from one of the large architecture firms in Minnesota, who was an ambassador for the Climate Reality Project, and she gave her testimonial, storytelling around the growing risks of climate change. And that was a really impactful experience. Many of our executives are very committed to sustainability, but we probably were a culture where we didn't talk about climate change. We talked about energy efficiency and cost reduction. But that was a very transformational moment for us, and following that, we signed the Ceres Climate Declaration. Ceres is a group that organizes businesses around clean energy policy, and we set our first set of corporate sustainability goals, and since that time, we've been working to identify clean energy solutions for our company. The step that we've taken to date is investing in community solar gardens in Minnesota. So that's been a very successful policy tool in Minnesota and Colorado and some other places. We've subscribed to about 23 megawatts. So it's a tool where you essentially subscribe for 25 years. We have served as the anchor tenant in those gardens. So while we don't own the renewable energy credit, but for our participation, those solar gardens would not be in the ground today. So we're proud of that. And then this year, we're actually commencing pretty significant engagement to look across our portfolio, all of our sites across the U.S. and North America, to determine how we can start to build out that clean energy portfolio using some of the other tools like virtual power purchase agreements.
Yeah, the Owens Corning story is somewhat similar. You know, we started kind of in the early 2000s when kind of two things happened, and one was a marketplace driver when USGBC kind of was first moving out in a big way, starting with lead building construction, and so we started to see demands in the marketplace that is very helpful from all of you to create expectations for the products that we put in the marketplace. So we began to see the you know, a green product kind of evolution happening and creating you know, both pressure and opportunity in our marketplace. So we had a kind of market driver. At the same time, concurrent with that, 2002 or so, the IPCC issued one of their reports that strongly linked human activity to climate change and had us begin focusing on our footprint. And we began in a very sort of traditional way with energy efficiency, kind of driving the reduction in energy use to make our products. And then as we kind of saw the trajectory, the more pressure with the subsequent IPCC reports, and then certainly with the 2 degree and now the 1.5 degree sort of max global warming, got us very interested in the whole idea of science-based target setting to align our goals with climate action. And when we did that, it became crystal clear that the only path to achieving that kind of massive reduction, which for us had us setting a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas intensity, that in addition to continued energy efficiency, which for us still is always kind of the cheapest path, that we needed to layer on renewables in a very big, high-scale way. And we began doing some sort of iconic 2.5, 2.6 megawatt systems co-located with our facilities, but then doing a big 250 megawatt wind deal that brought us about 60% of our U.S. electricity in renewables. So that gave us an opportunity to play in this in a very big way. So similar story, a little bit different scale, but kind of brought us the same way, market-based, and then kind of looking at responsible production. So Wes, these stories, you interact with companies to help them kind of see their path. Is this kind of similar to what you see elsewhere, or do you have anything that you want to sort of add to how companies are thinking about making progress in this area?
Yeah, well, I think, so first of all, in my own background, as of late, I've been working more on the manufacturing side of someplace within that kind of solar value chain. So worked with at one point the largest solar inverter manufacturer in the world, so SMA from Germany. And then after those guys, I worked with Fronius, which is an Austrian firm. And both of those companies, I think partly because they were in Europe, which tends to be a little bit further advanced in the US in terms of that whole idea of corporate sustainability, they both had very beautiful, futuristic campuses in Europe with multi-megawatt arrays and green roofs and all these things. So I think that the solar industry had this kind of commitment to walking its talk internally from fairly early on. As an aside, and it's actually more of a question back to you guys, one of the things that I started to see were just the pure financial returns of solar projects are pretty astounding. I mean, many times times greater than 10%, many times much greater than 10%. Do you see like just kind of a pure financial, we're going to diversify our investment portfolio, own and develop assets that happen to be renewables? Is that a thing?
Yeah, I can speak to that, and then
Sure.
Eliza, maybe you step in. So we look at it a little bit differently. We don't own our assets, so what we're not focused on return on investment, because it's actually not our investment. So we are looking at cost parity or better with grid pricing in our purchase power agreements. So the biggest kind of unknown in that space is that we end up signing long-term 20, 25-year purchase power agreements that are at a fixed or sometimes escalating, depends on where you start, pricing. And the biggest unknown in that is, of course, trying to figure out what grid parity will be 5 years, 2 years, a month from now, never mind 25 years from now. So the biggest conversations in our company tend to be not around return on investment, because again, it's not our investment, but more on the certainty of the escalators that are in the deals that are available to us. And that's kind of the nose-to-nose CFO, CSO discussions of certainty. And in the end, you don't know. But you also don't know whether you don't do the deal if the escalation is going to put you at a competitive disadvantage because somebody else is. So like any business deal, you get all the information possible and you end up making a decision based on that.
So our analysis very much mirrors that what they've done at Owens Corning. I will say the Solar Garden program is really amazing because we get an immediate cost reduction. So within the first year of the program, we saved $100,000, which of course our CFO loves. But I've also been just really astounded at how much better the ROI has gotten. You know, having done some renewable feasibility studies over the years, it's so much more attractive than it ever was. Yeah. But I have to say, I worry about the complexity of it. If you're not a multi-billion-dollar company and don't have a full-time equivalent or a McKinsey consultant or a Harvard Business School grad at the helm full-time, working on it, studying it, doing the financial analysis, it's really hard to break into the space. I don't know how much time your legal department has devoted to those agreements, but it's very significant. So I really think for us to catalyze the next revolution in renewables, we have to figure out how to make it a one-click step, right? We have to hide the complexity to the consumer or just smaller businesses and make it faster.
Yeah,
streamlined.
I talk with a lot of our peers, and you know, it's the same story. None of the companies that, you know, certainly not Owens Corning, you know, a materials company. Certainly, I would guess not you with your Windows product line. We want to be in the business of making the things we make, and we're just in the purchase power agreement zone in here because we can't get it off the grid. I mean, we're committed to footprint reduction, and our only path is essentially through direct deals for purchasing power. And same thing with the on-site. I mean, we would love to just be in a position where our grid operator, you know, saw these curves that you're showing, Wes, that in fact the new capacity is cheaper than existing capacity in some cases now in some markets, and would just offer that right off the grid to us. It would be terrific. So if there are any grid supply, because I mean it takes a lot of legal time, it takes a lot of management time, and in the end, people that aren't in the business are placing the bet. Which, you know, certainly the utility should know a lot more about the dynamics than product manufacturers. So.
Yeah, that reminds me so looping in the complexities around power purchase agreement, contract negotiations, and all that stuff. You know, that's largely grouped in the industry as so-called soft costs, right, of development, and it's really interesting because globally, the U.S. has the highest soft costs of developing energy projects. And you know, we have over 5,000 utilities, and many of the utilities have multiple different rate structures that they can be, you know, that a consumer can choose. And so it is just a nightmare at all different levels. So, you know, I would just, I think one big barrier that could be reduced should be addressed, and it clearly is, but just to talk about it, are those soft costs, make it simpler.
Yeah. So we've got a few more minutes here. So I thought what I would do is maybe ask the three of us just to talk about what are the 1, 2, or 3 things that you think could drive sort of more, better, faster in this space, particularly for your business. And then if you want to generalize, fine. But like what are those things that if you could wave your wand and say, if I could change this, I could get more done faster. Do you want to start, Wes?
Well, you know, the big one, and General Clark talked about it earlier, really it's a carbon tax. We really need to monetize carbon. And I think that from that will come, you know, every other thing. Because businesses are set up to optimize around whatever their cost constraints are. So let's just align our cost constraints with our environmental constraints, and then we're working towards the same goal.
Terrific. Eliza?
Okay, you said 3, so I think I'm going to take 3. But I'm going to focus on some different things than we've been talking about here today. The first thing is I think we need to diversify our influencers. If you look out in the audience today, we aren't necessarily representative of the global population or the U.S. population. To General Clark's point, we need youth engaged, but I think they are engaged, but we need to hear their voices more clearly. Secondly, in terms of reducing that complexity, I think that there's a lot of business opportunity in making it a more turnkey experience for business and for consumers, so any entrepreneurs in the audience. And then third, I think we just need to continue learning together. Anderson is about half Owens Corning's size, so we continue to learn from businesses that are you know, blue chip brands, global corporations that have already hit 100% renewable energy. We share information with companies that are smaller than ours. So I think in this case, all ships will rise with the tide. So we have to just keep spreading the message, not just to greenies like ourselves, but to the mainstream.
Perfect. So I will say that's my number 1 and my number 2, and I do my number 3.
Yeah, perfect.
So for me, and it's something that you all can have a direct impact on. I think what would make the biggest impact on our company doing more, better, faster is if we had more direct visibility to the demand associated with lower embodied carbon products. So that it would encourage us to have more resolve to figure out how to get more renewable energy, more energy efficiency, reduce the embodied carbon of the products that we produce. If we had more confidence through sort of direct observation that the actual decision makers that are deciding to put those products into real buildings, because they don't do anything sitting in our warehouses, the people made actual decisions based on the environmental product declarations that are kind of being demanded by architects and specifiers to transparently communicate the embodied carbon or other aspects of products. But if we saw that those were being used for real decision making and that we were winning in some cases and we were losing in others, that would create resolve in our company that creates the sort of business case for continued progress in this area. So you all can decide that every day with what you specify in the products that you put into your construction projects, but that would make a big difference for us. So we're at the end of our time. I want to thank our panelists and thank you for your attention. All right.
Our final female leader of the day is the Chief Sustainability Officer for Caesars Entertainment and sets the strategy, direction, and management goals for their corporate social responsibility initiatives, including responsible gaming, diversity and inclusion, environmental sustainability, community involvement, and global philanthropy. She also has oversight for the Caesars Foundation, a private entity funded by resorts owned or operated by Caesars Entertainment. Here to speak about stakeholder engagement, Gwen Megita.
Between you all and the cookies and great snacks outside. So I wanted to share our perspective, essentially over the last 14 years while at Caesars Entertainment, on tips, and particularly around the stakeholder engagement side. And the reason I share this is because it seems to be a very straightforward approach, stakeholder engagement around what nuances can we address, but based on a strategy that is foundational, and how do we embed our work into something that is core to the business is really what I want to share with you today. So first, I know that when people hear gaming, they think about straight up casinos and slot machines, but we also consider our business very much like the diversity of the businesses in here. For example, we have a number of retail stores, about 400 retail stores. We also see ourselves as a bank. We're regulated as a bank. We also have a real estate side of the business, places like the Forum Shops at Caesars or the Desert Passage at the Planet Hollywood, or Miracle Mile Shops, are all leased operations, as well as the direction that our business is heading in. So really want to look at it as a diversified approach as we relate to you all in the audience today as well. So I want to first set this in a framework. So any strategy that we've identified and learned, usually the first several years I get questioned a lot, and I still do, about how does this relate to our business? Why should I care? Should we turn off the fountains at Caesars Palace? Are we expected to take away the business experience of our customers at the Paris? So all of these questions are really answered to building a strategy within the core aspects of a company. And for us, the guiding principles are there in the blue. You see that's the code of commitment. It's our corporate ethos. It's who we are. It's how much of our strategies on our code of conduct, in fact, our own internal audits are built on how we manage to the code. And then our programs that core from foundational work around responsible business to compliance to the volunteer aspects to the policy advocacy side all stem from this side of the business. And then, of course, like many of you have in the yellow, gone through materiality assessments for your organizations or your stakeholders. So materiality for us, and as we've observed other companies, you might start off with about 100 different priority areas, narrow it down to say 5, maybe 10. But then I think where the space seems to be going is not just reporting on measures and numbers and inputs, whether it be hours of volunteerism, but really looking at what are the performance metrics of outputs. So for us, this means of the $3 million you might give of dollars or 2 million bars of soap you might give to clean the world, to what extent is it actually saving lives? And to what extent is philanthropy being re-engineered to come out with a output that is essentially changing an issue in a local jurisdiction? So these are real key areas that we continue to work at. It's very, very challenging, but fun in different ways. So areas in yellow, as you see, there are 11 material areas from responsible business and conduct to rewarding careers, health and wellness for employees, to, when you move over to the right, where it's in red, we think that's identifying with global frameworks that's easy to understand, that's not just speaking in the echo chamber of sustainability advocates, that speaks and is translatable, like the UN Sustainable Development Goals is it's a good guiding framework to which to follow. So what we've done, like many companies, the first year after 2015, you map to the goals based on your current strategies and your current activities, which we did. We ended up with about 7 of them that we were already working in. And then the hard part was getting 15 different departments internally to say, look, this is what we need to advance, the social and economic sustainability goals, narrow it down, do fewer things better, and simplify how we speak about our work globally, which is why you see all these colors in the corner there. It's called People, Planet, Play. It's basically a framework. It's not a strategy, but it was an answer to our global president who said, look, we're doing too many things. It's not really clear. What does it mean to the valet attendant or the bartender? What do we do around people? What do we do around the planet? And what do we do around our customers? So very simply and logically, we've also translated it to our UK, Middle East, and Africa regions as well, which they immediately gravitated onto because it was so salient and simplified to the non-professionals. So those three there are on the right in red are the 3 SDGs that we mapped to. And from there, we're shifting to more of the 2020 to 2050 related goals around sustainable cities and communities. And the planet was very clear: greenhouse gases, climate, science-based targets around climate action. That was clearer. And the more difficult ones, of course, are around social, economic sustainability and how we translate that even internally to get stakeholder buy-in. So speaking about stakeholders, this is probably the latest iteration of our stakeholder wheel. When I share this to my procurement colleagues, they have an entirely different measure of success. For example, what you see there is working with activist groups. For us, on our side of the business, we welcome that engagement. We educate them about our work. We're authentic about where we fail and where we need improvement on. But for our procurement side, where we may boast about our work and say LGBTQ equality, that may cause some questions around what about the other types of diverse businesses, or what about the other types of procurements that we're not doing as well as in. So this is a really balanced approach that we deal with daily in the company, but also wanted to share that, I think 5 years ago when looking at the stakeholder wheel, you wouldn't have seen the investor activists, the investor groups, investor risk assessors, and the NGO activists as actively working together as they are today. This is just one informing the other on the environmental social governance side of the work, but also the way that ESG researchers are increasingly being much more sophisticated in what they ask companies to do. The questions from, say, Morgan Stanley or Dow Jones Sustainability Index are much deeper, more specific, and very sophisticated, more sophisticated than it has been in the past. We also look at, say, pre-competitive cooperation. So working with competitors, working with trade associations, and what can we do that goes beyond cost savings? What can we do that is shared knowledge? For example, in 2 weeks, I'll be heading into a international tourism partnership with the largest counterparts from Hilton, Marriott, Hyatt, IHG, and others in hospitality are in this very small network called International Tourism Partnership. Surprised to see that many of them actually donate their ethical labor sourcing training materials or donate their learnings around human rights and human trafficking. So this is where the space is that we see ourselves moving into and others moving into, as well as encouraging that the pre-competitive competition for collaboration. So on sharing this other slide, this is much more of a simplified approach to who in here writes sustainability reports or is part of one or is a customer around it. I mean, most of us, we all have this, right? Sustainability or corporate social responsibility reports. And oftentimes you hear, it's painstaking to me because I've overseen this for about 10 years, is who reads it, how is it utilized, and why are we doing it? All right, so, my aha moment was 3 weeks ago, our chief communication officer, it dawned on me that he continued to feel that our audience was entirely different from what I thought our audience was. So the need and the expectation to shorten the reports, to make it much more business friendly, to make it much more breathable for non-sustainability CSR types was continued to be a growing expectation. Now I see our reporting to appeal to 9 or 10 other stakeholders, from journalists from media, from talent acquisition, to new development, partnerships, to those who will question the work or continue to question our work around these watchdog groups as well. But I share this slide because it's something that we've moved towards. We've literally cut our reporting in half. So we still report to these global frameworks, but our report is now about 60 pages. But we've also shifted to an approach of learning through the process, and beyond the report launch or beyond releasing materials, we utilize in social media, in third-party certifications for ESG researchers, these pieces that live beyond that one point in time is what we're working towards, or continue to work towards, as well as 60 pages in one infographic, as you see right there on the slide. So this is all, who do we speak to and how we speak in the audience it's very different. I think another example of our stakeholder engagement is much of our work focuses heavily on policymakers, electeds, regulators as well, because in gaming entertainment, you're basically given one license to operate in that particular jurisdiction. So we have about 50 of those licenses, and each of those jurisdictions may have a regulator that operates differently from, say, Pennsylvania with Mississippi, with Missouri, all different priorities of interest. And usually in our line of business, you see more of a expectation on how is a new business going to provide more tax dollars, more infrastructure, more money for schools, more money for fire and safety and so on. So another piece of engagement and evolution for us has been these market summary sheets, market summary reports. So a few years ago, it might have been all about taxation, but today it includes things such as your social impacts, what we're doing to invest in capital and others. But I think the most interesting piece is how can companies benchmark themselves against others, right? Because the bigger company is, the numbers sound greater because there's more stuff to give and buy. But moving into this social monetization approach that we took on these reports, where we said, okay, of all the companies in the US that operate in Nevada, how do we compare in monetizing our social impact relative to the average company there for every $10 million in revenue? So the $10 million, that's normalizing. Combine the biggest impact areas, such as local, national taxations, wages, dollars, benefits, the value of volunteer hour, value of giving, etc. We put that together in this assessment. The benchmark is, relative to other US companies who operate in that region, what is the benchmark? It generally happens to be, and I believe other highly taxed organizations, about 2 or 3 times higher than the average US company in that particular region. So this is one way that we encourage our peers, our counterparts, to really look at how do you normalize and quantify, but also look at the outputs into that particular space. So I think one of the more under-leveraged assets of a company happens to be its people, right? Because a lot of times, corporate policy and strategy people like myself, we put together the strategy, send it out, talk to our stakeholders out there, but it doesn't get embedded into the organization. And particularly, it doesn't get embedded into these roles that tend to have higher turnover, or people who don't have access to company emails. For example, 60 or 70% of our own employees don't have a company email account. So what we've done is essentially prioritize our focus on these line-level employees, on non-management, because it's extremely important to keep the behavior changes with a carrot around environmental programs, to engage them, because we have a number of years of proof that in a service-oriented business, the service profit chain is extremely important to keep employees happy, to keep them engaged, in fact, to even keep them into this place of purpose in the workplace. So once you have a higher sense of purpose in the workplace, you tend to have a much higher sense of happiness and loyalty with the customers. There's a direct dollar correlation with customer loyalty and retention, as you know, from the effects of that the employee engagement piece. So all of these programs that you see here have been around for 10, 20, 30 years at our company. They have to be refreshed every 2 or 3 years as a re-engagement program around responsible gaming. There's about 1,000 ambassadors out there, but they all have to be trained and they turn over. But what does the science bring into business around responsible conduct from, say, what was studied as compulsive behavior today versus 30 years ago? Different. So you have to refresh these programs and infuse it with outside knowledge and researchers, for example. The employee piece around affinity groups, we are trying to do much more crossover of diversity groups with, say, general community involvement. Because I don't see enough crossover in our space of other practitioners on the diversity side and inclusion with the employee volunteer piece as well. So this is an area I think we'll continue to work through. I think the more that we find embedding participation in these programs with actually variable compensation or success in annual measurement objectives or even success in gaining promotions rates should really tie into the level of engagement they have in core sustainability programs. So if I were speaking to, I had a feeling that everything disappeared there, but in the white boxes at the top, there are employee engagement is at the top. So if I were speaking to an executive or our board, I would use this slide with the boxes filled in. At the top of it, you tend to have employee engagement. So looking at studies, we see a 17 to 27% higher employee engagement scores if that employee participates in responsible conduct, diversity, Code Green, or HERO programs in the company. On the right there, the $50 million in annualized revenue, that is ROI, so operation efficiencies. This is the annual savings of our capital-driven programs for energy efficiency. This is pretty conservative. It's probably about 60 or so million. This is just based on investing from about 2003. We brought all these programs internally and had a corporate function to look at resource savings. Now the one on the bottom and the one on the opposite side are really basically saying, look, the attractiveness that a company has in the community can be tracked and can be affected by the way a company communicates to its guest. And we've seen this, if you're familiar with net promoter scores, but this is like the golden rod standard for marketers and customer service types. So if a net promoter score in an average company might be about 7% increase a year as a target, we find that by communicating our sustainability programs, you can hit that score and up to 3 times higher by just sharing with them in the right way what you're doing for sustainability on the social, economic, and environment. But it has to be done in the right way, really easy to digest, easy to understand. What are we doing around employee health or well-being? What are you doing around reducing the impact to the environment? But not sounding too preachy and not sounding too boastful will really impact that net promoter score. And then, of course, on the bottom, in certain businesses, or many businesses, you want to be seen as acceptable partners in the community, right? So we see things on the news most recently of certain large employers who didn't have the right level of stakeholder engagement on the ground, so they're not accepted as building new operations in that community. So that happens to us all the time. We need to proactively build our social license to operate, being a gaming entity. So that social license to operate is essentially built on not just goodwill, but strategically and embedded. What does a social license to operate do to increase if we maybe test about 50 different things that we do around responsible business, but we communicate actively the top 4 or 5 different areas. And you see a considerable increase in jump on that license to operate. So I think one of the other areas, I know many of you are suppliers or suppliers to each other or service providers for suppliers, and when I say suppliers, it's also in the design and construction industry as well. We consider them suppliers. So our approach to sustainability and supplier diversity has really evolved since 2013. And it first starts with essentially your life cycle assessment and analysis there, which we narrow down into these commodities of concern. And the commodities were selected both on a impact of spend, reputational, but also real environmental and global risks. I mean, risks such as, you know, are we going to have enough seafood in the next 10 years to actually feed the planet, or actually have life in the sea in 30, 40, 50 years from now? So it's real issues. So we've really prioritized how a company should approach this through working with strong standards, such as the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, World Resources Institute on the outcomes of carbon management and the effects on the climate, and this commodities of concern. I think the real opportunity in this is one area that we're spending much more time on, because the intersection of sustainability and, say, supplier diversity can be huge. It is big, but there's very few organizations that kind of float between the environmental side and then the piece that really enforces or impacts entrepreneurship, cost savings, and revenue generation, which we see as, if you help and work with entrepreneurs who happen to be diverse, veteran, women-owned, minority-owned, disabled, LGBT-owned, that there is a massive opportunity in growing the economy locally through entrepreneurship. And even within our company, I can share that 2013, we thought launching a much more rigorous supplier diversity program would cost much more money, and it didn't. It actually saved money. But actually, we found much more learnings in terms of innovations and new types of businesses, or the types of businesses that we could collaborate on, just from having a diverse supplier come to the table and to be doing more business with them. So these are areas, I think the sustainability piece with carbon and management, CDP, I think a lot of you are familiar with them. What we shared with them last week, we hosted their supply chain summit at the Flamingo. And I shared that I feel like being in the sustainability space, that we are often in our echo chambers, and we're using language that, you know, I could go to a conference. I was in DC last week talking to our civil rights advocates, and just, you know, we all talk about managing the business, growing capacity, but the language we use is so different. And I usually am at the same conference with different people in the same companies, the diversity types or the sustainability types, and oftentimes we're not even talking within our own organizations. So it's just, I think my takeaway this past year in being more active in multiple spaces has been to look at ways to intentionally drive outcomes through this intersectionality of diversity and supplier. So this is one example of a customer engagement side. So we often see as sustainability advocates, how do you show more revenue? How do we count things as such as a marketer would count in terms of increase of activity, increase of spend, for us, increase of gaming play? This is a case in Southern California. The last 4 years, we've done much more work around customer behavior and sustainability. So here's a brief video.
We were inspired to create the Save the Bees program through our research when we were developing our Bees Knees promotion. We got in contact with a local beekeeper and found out how easy it was for us really to get involved in this. People, Planet, Play is important to our culture for really obvious reasons. Everything that we do revolves around those 3 things. Now we're here making an impact with our 5 local hives. The Save the Bees program means a lot to me because it shows what the team can do when they're motivated and given the right opportunities to do what they think is right. This isn't something that we had set out and planned to do. It's just something that occurred naturally, where the team saw an opportunity to make a difference and stepped up and made it happen. I highly recommend you reach out to a local beekeeper and just ask the question, can we sponsor a beehive? Can we be a part of this? What can we do to help? This program has delivered on Caesar's commitment to environmental stewardship through actually physically making a difference in the local environment. We recently received our first real results from our local beehives. We harvested 12 gallons of honey from our 5 beehives. This is the best honey you can get anywhere. We just stepped up and did it, and personally I think that is a reflection of the team that we have and what we stand for.
So that's an example of how do we translate what could be perceived as a very narrow issue that appeals to a certain audience, but it really is a global issue around the bee colonies. And we changed it into a marketing promotion in Southern California. And the marketing promotion thereby affected a series of outcomes, right? The revenue impacts and others. And this is a really interesting case because Southern California we actually operate the property for the Rincon Band tribe. We can suggest, but we don't own, so it's a lot of influencing and educating around how can we partner here. But this was, fast forward, we also did some things around this HuffPost AOL. It's around the sponsored content media. But I think the most interesting thing is that we, without investing any more money, without doing any more promotional dollars to draw people to the the property, we basically split their database in half. And half of the database this is tens of thousands of customers, receive one additional email a month with a video, something like this, or something around EV charge stations, or something around their organic garden. But the customers who were in this additional email a month spent 1.5% more revenue with that property in a year period. And for a property of that size, it might be on the low end, 100,000, on the high end, million, I'm sorry. Low end, about $1 million, higher end, about $4.7 million. This is without any additional investment in marketing. When we look at the impact of that, and the impact of what it could do for multiple locations, for multiple entities, it's significant. So we actually are working on 6 different markets for something like that, but also doing more around embedding sustainability into general marketing promotions. In fact, last year, we had 4 times higher engagement around marketing promotions around this People, Planet, Play concept as well. A $80,000 investment in prizes around the country affected about $4.7 million in revenue. So pretty significant. You see the desire is there, but it has to be done in the right way, so it's not preachy or it's not too much about us. It's about the customers and so on. Lastly, I wanted to share with you, we have a few associates in here, I believe, Lauren Boitel of Impact NV and Dave Ray, who is on the board of Impact NV. This is an example around community-based stakeholder engagement. Now, 12 years ago, we were solely focused on the environment. So Green Chips was a name. It was an organization that the city of Las Vegas thought of. They came to organizations like us and our competitors, the utilities, nonprofits in the region, and focused very heavily around environmental sustainability on this being an umbrella organization for the region. Now fast forward, probably about 4 years ago, we started looking at how do we expand on the social and economic aspects of this. So the name was updated to Impact NV, but also this organization is doing some really interesting things around being the first to have a social impact fund in a region, and particularly one that is focused around collective impact. So collective impact is, as you probably know, it's very much focused around policy, regulatory, investments, contracts, licensing, all of the above. It's the re-engineering of philanthropy that I spoke about earlier, but it's also taken on very key critical issues based on a material assessment. For us in the region, it's around homelessness, immigration, integration, and human trafficking. So if you see that on the right, on the other side of that, that's basically an ad in a local publication around the updated approach to something that's much broader and much more impactful in this growth, much more difficult, of course. So that's all that I have for you today. Hopefully you've taken a nugget or nutshell away on something that you could use in your workplace, and I'm happy to answer questions in the reception area afterwards. Thank you.
We're going to take a short break for refreshments and networking. Refreshments are located in the lobby. We will resume the program right here in the concert hall at 3:45. Don't be late for our final session of the day.